Hi, everybody. Welcome to the new episode of Edixir Circle. Today, we have a very successful and a young American entrepreneur with us. His name is Nicholas Van Landschoot. Hi, Nick. Thank you for being here.
Hi, it's great to be here, and thanks for having me.
So with Nick today, we think that Nick is a very special person because at the age of 17, he built an AI company called Interest AI, and he was able to secure a $500,000 worth of investment into his company. I think that at this age, this is an extraordinary story. So we are going to talk about his story, his company, and potentially we are going to talk about the education system that he went through and maybe have some ideas about how this education system could have helped him better in his journey. But before we start, Nick, for people who don't know about you, I want to talk about Nick. Like, who's Nick? Where are you from? Which high school did you go to? Can we talk about that briefly a little bit?
For sure. So I grew up in between kind of Boulder, Colorado, and Broomfield for the most part. I went to primarily Fairview High School for most of my high school career. Now I'm based in San Francisco.
Is this a public school?
I did go to a public school, yes.
So before we talk about anything, I think we should talk about Interest AI, right? So can you tell me about how did you come up with the idea? What led you towards this? But before all that, let's just talk about what Interest AI is.
For sure. So Interest is really an open source intelligence platform. And what that means is there are essentially a lot of different data sources out there, things from leaked passwords to data on physical infrastructure. And we link it all together in a platform, whether that's on a graph or search-like interface, so that investigators can aggregate and sift through all of this data to come to important conclusions, whether that's in the criminal case, tracking down some, predator or something like that, or whether it's more for governmental or military intentions, looking at narrative tracking and those sorts of things.
That's a very niche area to develop any kind of AI tool, right? Especially at the age of 17. Right. So how did you come up with that? Like, what made you decide that you wanted to do something like this?
Yes, for sure. So, it was honestly kind of a different series of pivots. So I started with my co-founder in high school. We were working on a chat with your data chatbot, a very generic idea, but this was when GPT 3.5 had really just come out. So generative AI was, very new, productized phase of it at least. And we saw, okay, this is going to become oversaturated. Everyone's building a chat with your data chatbot. And we pivoted into a company called API Gen that was doing very niche code generation for generating APIs. For the non-technical audience, APIs are essentially the glue that connect the internet together. So if one service wants to go and talk to another service, it's an API that handles that. And that's the idea that we originally raised money for. So we worked on that for about a year, and the product was somewhat impressive, but at the end of the day, there just wasn't that much enterprise demand for it. There are a couple, individual people who really liked it, but it didn't fit well into the enterprise stack. So that's one lesson we learned. And from there, we realized, okay, we need to pivot. So we started really just talking to people. And there were a couple industries we were interested in, but we were really interested in law enforcement. So we actually started talking with a lot of police officers and a couple people in the military as well. And one thing that kept coming up was this open source intelligence, and everyone's saying, we do a lot with open source intelligence. We really believe open source intelligence is the future, but the tools around it are just quite old. They're not all really up to date, and we think they could be doing more.
It's a great way to start, and also a great example because you tried something first. That was a great learning experience for you, and you kept going, which is really good. But above all, to be able to jump in the first project or this one, it requires a lot of skills, right? To be able to develop and deliver these kind of technologies, you need to be able to high-level skills, especially in technology. Not only that, you also had at the age of 17, you also had a very good understanding of between delivering enterprise level technology compared to business to customer kind of a technology. You made that distinction and you didn't focus on B2C, but enterprise. So this also requires a different level of understanding of business and building a company. So with the technical stuff, all of these things on top of each other at the age of 17, how did that happen? How did you acquire all these skills?
That's a good question. So I'm a fairly autodidactic person. I taught myself programming when I was very young. I really started when I was about 8 on that. In terms of the choice to focus on enterprise as opposed to something more in the B2C area. I honestly just knew, social media, marketing, it's not really my strength. I think we're better at doing more technically impressive things and individual conversations, talking with executives, explaining solutions rather than trying to just go and get a bunch of billboards, stir up attention online. It's really just, founder market fit.
And you said you started picking up on things at the age of 17, especially programming, you said, right?
Or I started programming when I was about 8. So we started this business when I was 17. I think we raised when I was 18. And we pivoted probably when I was almost 19.
So you started learning technical stuff at the age of 8. And I guess until you were 17 and 18 for those 10 years, it was a sequence of challenges that you faced, right? Because you wanted to learn things and try new things, which led to your current level of knowledge and skill. So in this journey, what was the right decisions, I could say maybe, that led you to acquire the correct skills for you to be able to do what you're doing today?
It's a good question. I was just starting young was very good for me. And that gave me time to really just focus on a lot of projects for the first few years that maybe weren't very useful, but that taught me a lot of, core foundational concepts and just got me very comfortable writing code, especially, when everything was by hand a few years ago. I think that was very important. And then I think working on larger projects and more complex projects really also helped me a lot. I can honestly think to like 2 or 3 projects I'd say I learned the most from. I think one mistake I made was I threw away a lot of code for sure. I was probably the type of person I'd start on one project and I'd get, halfway in and I'd, rather than refactor, I'd go and delete it and start again. And I'd try like 3 times on one thing. So maybe you do learn that way, but I'm not sure if that's the most effective either.
So if you're writing code, don't throw it away, guys. That's the message, I guess, right?
I would say so. I probably regret doing that.
What about AI? So AI probably got into your life when you were maybe 13 or 14 or something like that, right? If I guessing correctly, right? How did that change your way of work, way of development, way of looking at business? How did that help you, or it was a challenge for you?
So, I started with AI, really not with generative AI, but with image models. So that's one project I learned a lot from actually, was creating an image model and working at a very low level. I went through and I built one out from scratch. So that was very useful for me. Gen AI in its current form with ChatGPT and that sort of stuff didn't really come around, I think, until I was 16 or 17. And even then, it was really more useful for writing. It couldn't do any programming beyond very basic boilerplate. And now that it's gotten much better with agentic capabilities and coding capabilities, I have been trying to use it more. I'll be honest, it's still, a little bit frustrating to use sometimes. I have to get myself to use it and figure out how to use it the most efficiently. I think there's a hard choice you have to make. How much oversight do I want to give this model by going through line by line and reading everything? And what tasks can you just set it off to go and do? Because it is a massive efficiency unlock when you use it properly. But it's a real skill to learn for sure.
Yeah, that we're able to know how to use it properly for a given task is the bigger challenge. Also, the post-processing is another challenge, especially for coding, I would say. How many people on your team right now, Nick?
So it's pretty lean. I'd really say, about 3.5, because we have one who's kind of, half committed. So it's, me and my co-founder. We have then one employee who's with us really full time.
So there's also 3 people, 4 people, right? Maybe one part-time, and you have a lot of tasks that you have to go through. And this is a team effort. And this also requires another level of skill, which is, you could say emotional intelligence or social skills, how to manage a team, how to manage a workload and talent, all together to optimize your runway, I could say, right? So how do you deal with that, and what kind of challenges have you faced as a young entrepreneur?
I think that's one area where I really just had to look at advice, listen to others who've been doing it for longer than me. And those are, very different things. If it's just planning out tasks, I think for me, at first I was very bad at estimating how long something would take. Okay, this is going to take in 2 weeks and then it takes a month, or this is going to take 3 months and then it takes 5 months. But, I found just very few effective things you can do. Really working in cycles has been effective for us. So we do 2-week cycles. And then, I know if I estimate the relative difficulty of each task, I could say we could probably get, about X number of tasks done over this period of time. And I found that's been pretty effective. In terms of managing the team, I don't think that's honestly been too hard for us because I'd say everyone's on a pretty equal footing. There are different titles in the company. There's different amount of ownership, but it's not overly hierarchical.
Yeah, there's some sort of autonomy for everybody in their own specific niche within the company. We could say, I think another advantage in that sense is that team is small. So who are you going to manage, right? Or the only thing you have to manage is the tasks, basically, just like you said, which is also another advantage in a way compared to a bigger team. Being lean is good. So I want to go back to Intrace again. How successful is Intrace right now? You said that you work with police force. I'm assuming that you got some sort of governmental contacts also, right?
So yeah, it's honestly less with police forces and more with other branches of government. And then we work a lot with PI firms, also things like lenders. We're really getting into executive threat protection. So monitoring for threats against executives or facilities and that sort of thing.
Are you the one who's closing these sales?
I close some of them. My co-founder probably handles more sales. He's the CEO. I handle more things on the technical side, but I probably take about 20 or 25% of the deals.
How was that experience? That's also a big challenge too.
For sure. You learn a lot really at every different stage of the deal. I think it's something we were initially unprepared for, but I think we learned very quickly after just a couple deals of how to close them. I think you get your own particular taste for what works for you. And then there are also just, I think, some good formulas that anyone can use. Principles.
You're doing very good, man. These are great things that you're talking about. So let's go back to high school, right? And obviously you have done all these great things with your teammates and Intrace is doing well as well. So think about your high school years. And I want to ask you this question. All this journey starting from the age of 8 and up until today, right now, think about your journey. How do you think education, K-12, would have been more helpful to you in this journey? How can we, if you had the power and the strength to change this educational system in any kind of way that you like, how could we have done that? How could education be more helpful in this kind of a journey for someone like you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really from, I think, about halfway through first grade to high school, I was homeschooled, which really meant, I did a couple online classes, but I was mostly self-taught. And I think that was very helpful for me because it gave me time to focus on what I was interested in and go very deep programming. So, by the time I got to high school, I'd probably been spending many, many hours a week on programming and on technical things. I think in high school, maybe it was a little less useful for me, to be honest. I think I think there are a lot of problems with the way we have schools set up right now. They try to really cover every subject. So you'll have classes even in subjects that are particularly important to you, right? You have to take a English literature class, which maybe is good, but I think if you have to do that for 4 years and it's taking away time from what you're trying to focus on, it's not the most productive thing. I also think, just the model of education we use here in the United States isn't particularly optimized. It actually goes as far as to say, almost any model would be better. Our education model is, of course, based on the Prussian system, really made to crush dissent and produce factory-like workers. And I think we've somehow made it even worse than that because we've implemented things like Common Core to teach math. It surely isn't the best way to do it. I heard, the way they're teaching people to read now, they're not using phonics, but they do some sort of word recognition where they're teaching them to do every individual word and recognize the word. That's something that doesn't work. I think they're going back on that now. I think, many other forms just work a lot better, whether it's apprenticeship, direct tutoring, anything where there's individual interaction, hands-on learning.
Yeah, it's kind of a challenging thing to do, because there's millions of students and there's insufficient funds for us to be able to provide a tutor for every student. And this is actually what we are focused on at the personal level. We're trying to, develop systems at Edixir that would be able to actually teach the student, those common core things that you're talking about, and optimize student's time so the student can go out there and focus on things that they like or they are skilled at, basically. And I agree with you at everything that you said. Also, right now, the schools are a bit soft. Anybody can pass any class, without failure. It wasn't like that before. So when the brain is not forced towards a challenge, it's not going to learn anything because the brain doesn't like the stress. But the challenge, right, requires for us to be able to face a certain levels of stress. So if you don't introduce stress to the brain, it's not going to grow. That's also a very big problem as well, with education today, we believe. And yeah, these are great ideas. What do you think about AI though? Do you think that we should teach AI how to develop AI tools and gadgets or agents? Do you think that we should integrate that into the curriculums? Lastly,
I think it should be a elective focus for sure. I would be concerned about making it a mandatory class. This is with most classes. I think you look back to, the 2010s and you had the learn to code phase and you had every single person pushed into programming, going to some coding boot camp. The university classes were overfilled. You had 100 students to one teacher. And then they get out and you realize, a lot of these people don't actually know computer science. And maybe for a couple of years, there's so much demand that they just needed jobs, but then that demand fell. And now you have people who kind of half know computer science, mostly don't, who really aren't as employable. So I think that's a big problem, over-indexing on one area. So I would be weary of doing that again with AI agents, because I think it's going to be a similar thing where we're pushing, okay, everyone needs to learn this AI stuff. And probably, yes, everyone should know how to use certain AI tools in their workflow. I don't know how hard it is to teach that skill. Like asking ChatGPT, go do this, isn't really a skill in and of itself. Maybe if we're using it for a very specific thing, that's where there's some more niche skills. But I also think that those will probably change. The way we will interact with AI has changed, past couple of years, really every few months. So I don't know how much sense it makes sense to learn how to do a skill that's probably going to change. If you're teaching someone how to use AI now in first grade, I wouldn't be super confident that those skills are still going to be relevant by the time they're out of high school and college.
Yeah, well, of course, I wasn't talking about these generic LM tools. What I was trying to say is building agents, creating tools, AI-based tools to do certain works and certain jobs for you. Because even if you're not going to find a company and you're going to go into the workforce somehow, right? You want to be able to develop these kind of tools so you can cover more work in shorter periods of time. Today, when I'm hiring for Edixir, for example, it's today, of course. What you say is pretty accurate. But today, when I'm hiring for Edixir, I'm not going to work with anyone who doesn't have AI tools in their workflow, because it's just like takes away a lot of nonsensical work for your brain to be busy with in your workflow. And in just that actually is very effective. And we have found it very effective in our own workflow at Edixir, I would say. Lastly, at this topic what about the skills as a young person, as the new generation, your ideas are very valuable. As a person who is also involved in this level of entrepreneurship, what do you think that kids in high school right now should pick up on? What kind of things would be good for them in the future in that sense to follow up?
I don't think there's one skill that everyone should necessarily pick up on, but I think everyone does need to find something that they care about. Everyone needs to really, decide what they want to do and go after that one thing, whether it's in entrepreneurship, in the sciences, whether it's in the trades or something like that. I think there are a lot of people who are just kind of wandering or, going from idea to idea. Maybe that's okay, but I think it is better if you know what you're going to do and that you can go and execute on that thing. So I think that's one thing that's really missing.
Yeah, I understand. Like, don't focus on something specific, but be versatile and learn as much as you can. I guess we can summarize it in that sense. All right, Nick, thank you for being here again. It was a great conversation with you, and looking forward to hearing, more success stories out of Interest AI and you, and we'll be following you. Thank you again.
All right, thank you. You have a nice day.